I shouldn't have opened the door. I'm saying that now, staring at the handle from across the room. Because I know that once you let something in, it doesn't just leave when you ask it to. It makes itself at home in the corners of your life, until you realize you aren't the one who lives there anymore. It starts as a guest, then a roommate, and finally, it becomes the landlord of your very sanity. It started on a Tuesday, a day so aggressive in its normalcy that I didn't think twice about the first knock. I live in a small, quiet house on the edge of town, the kind of place where the loudest thing you usually hear is the wind catching the copper chimes on the porch, or the occasional rustle of a stray cat moving through the overgrown hydrangeas. I was in the kitchen, washing a coffee mug, watching the steam rise and vanish into the air. The rhythm of the water hitting the porcelain was hypnotic, a mundane task in a mundane life. I remember the smell of the dish soap artificial lemon and the way the light from the window hit the soap bubbles, turning them into tiny iridescent orbs. Then, the sound came. It wasn't a frantic pounding or an aggressive slam. It was 3 deliberate, rhythmic knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I dried my hands on a towel, the fabric rough and scratchy against my skin, and walked to the entryway. The floorboards beneath the rug gave their familiar, comforting creak, a sound I usually associated with the safety of home. We don't get many solicitors out here, and my friends always text before they show up. I looked through the peephole, but it was blurry, like someone had smeared a thick, greasy thumb over the glass on the outside. I figured it was just condensation from the morning fog, or maybe a bit of residue from the cleaning spray I'd used the day before. I reached for the deadbolt, feeling that tiny, metallic resistance it always gives right before it clicks, and swung the door open. There was nobody there. The porch was empty. The gravel driveway was still, each gray stone resting exactly where it belonged, undisturbed. Even the trees at the edge of the property seemed frozen against the overcast, slate-gray sky. I stepped out onto the welcome mat, the cold air biting at the back of my neck, looking left and right. I checked behind the large porch planters, thinking maybe a neighbor's kid was playing a game. But the silence was absolute. Not even a bird chirped in the oaks. The air felt heavy, stagnant, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the immediate vicinity. I stood there for a full minute, feeling a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, before going back inside. I chalked it up to a trick of the wind, or perhaps a large bird hitting the wood, and I clicked the lock back into place. That was mistake number 1, because about 10 minutes later, while I was sitting on my sofa trying to focus on a book, I heard the sound again. But it wasn't on the front door this time. It was coming from the hallway. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. My breath hitched, caught in the back of my throat like a jagged stone. The hallway leads to my bedroom, and the bathroom it's the spine of the house. There are no exterior doors there, no windows that lead to the porch. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The pulse thudding so loudly in my ears it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. The house felt colder, the kind of chill that doesn't come from a draft but feels like it's emanating from the very marrow of the walls. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, like I was walking through wet sand, and grabbed a heavy glass vase from the coffee table. Its weight was cold and grounding. I walked toward the hall, my socks sliding silently over the hardwood. The air felt thick, like I was moving through gelatin. Every movement felt sluggish, forced. I reached the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, casting a long, thin shadow across the floor that looked like a reaching finger. I pushed it open, expecting an intruder, a prankster, anything tangible that I could fight or scream at. But the room was exactly as I'd left it. The bed was unmade, the sheets ruffled in the center, and the window was locked tight from the inside. I stood in the center of the rug, listening to the sound of my own ragged, uneven breathing. Then, I saw it. On the white pillowcase of my bed, there was a damp spot. It was small, about the size of a coin, but it was dark against the linen. I leaned in, my stomach churning. A faint metallic scent drifted up. It wasn't blood. It smelled like stagnant water, the kind of smell you find at the bottom of a well, or in a pond that hasn't moved in years. I touched it with the tip of my finger. The coldness of that moisture was unnatural. It made my entire arm go numb, a pins and needles sensation that traveled all the way to my shoulder. It felt as if the heat was being sucked out of my body through that single point of contact. I decided then that I was leaving. I didn't care if I was being paranoid, or if I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand, and my phone from my pocket, and headed for the front door. I moved fast, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the quiet house. But as I reached for the front door handle, I stopped. There was a folded piece of paper lying on the floor, right where I had been standing when I first opened the door earlier. It wasn't there when I walked to the hallway. I would have stepped on it. I picked it up with trembling fingers, the paper feeling unnervingly dry and crisp, almost like old parchment. I unfolded it. There was no writing on it, just a hand-drawn map of my own house. Every room was labeled in a shaky, cramped script that looked like it had been written by someone who had forgotten how to hold a pen. But there was an extra room drawn on the back of the house, a room that didn't exist in my blueprints. I looked at the map, then at my own hallway. The drawing showed a door at the very end of the hall, past the bathroom, where the linen closet is supposed to be. In reality, that's just a solid wall at the end of the corridor. I walked back, my feet feeling like they were made of lead, and stared at that wall. The floral wallpaper was old, peeling slightly at the top corner. A pattern of faded roses that suddenly looked like twisted, screaming faces. I pressed my palm against the center of the wall. It wasn't solid. It felt soft, like there was nothing but thin fabric or hollow space behind the paper. I took a pocket knife from my drawer and made a small, vertical slit in the wallpaper. I expected to see studs, insulation, or the brick of the exterior. Instead, I saw a handle. A brass, tarnished door handle embedded directly into the drywall, hidden behind the paper like a secret. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get in the car and drive until the gas ran out. But there is a specific kind of horror-fueled curiosity that feels like a physical pull. It's a sickness of the mind. I gripped the handle, turned it, moved with a silent, terrifying fluidity, and I pulled. The wall swung open as easily as a well-oiled gate. Behind it wasn't a room. It was a staircase, narrow and steep, descending into a darkness so absolute, it felt like it had its own weight. The smell of stagnant water and old wet earth hit me like a physical blow, making me gag. I pulled out my phone, my thumb shaking so much the beam danced erratically. The beam cut through the dark, revealing wooden steps covered in a fine gray dust that looked like ash. I started to go down. Every step creaked, a slow, agonizing groan of wood that had been holding its breath for decades. The further down I went, the louder a sound became. It was a wet, rhythmic sliding dot slop, slide, slot, slide dot. I reached the bottom. The flashlight revealed a basement I never knew I had, a space beneath the foundation that wasn't in any records. The floor was covered in an inch of that same dark, foul-smelling water, reflecting the light of my phone in jagged, oily patterns. In the center of the room was a chair, a simple wooden chair, facing away from me, its legs submerged in the murky water, and someone was sitting in it. "Hello." My voice was a pathetic whisper, barely audible over the sound of the water. The figure didn't move. It was draped in a heavy, tan cardigan, the same kind my father used to wear before he passed away. I walked around the side, the water splashing softly against my shoes, the cold seeping through my socks. As I got to the front, the light hit the figure's face. It wasn't a person. It was a mannequin, but its skin was made of something that looked like cured, translucent meat. It was yellowed and stretched tight over a frame. But the eyes were real. They were wet, human eyes, bloodshot and wide, blinking slowly in the harsh white light of my phone. Its mouth was stitched shut with thick, black cord. The skin puckered around the entry points, then the mannequin's hand moved. It didn't reach for me. It pointed to the corner of the room. I turned the light, my hand shaking so much, the beam danced erratically. There, stacked neatly against the stone wall, were hundreds of Polaroid photos. I picked one up, the edges damp. It was a photo of me. I was sleeping. The angle was from directly above my bed. In the next one, I was eating dinner, the photo taken from the gap in the floorboards. In the next, I was standing at the front door, opening it that morning, my back turned to the camera. I realized then, with a jolt of pure, icy terror, that the nobody I saw through the peephole hadn't been standing on the porch. They had been standing right behind me in the entryway, moving in perfect synchronization with my own body so I wouldn't see them in my peripheral vision. I turned to run, but the figure in the chair wasn't there anymore. The chair was empty, still rocking slightly in the water. The ripples were moving toward me from the darkness at the far end of the basement. I scrambled back up the stairs, my heart nearly bursting against my chest, my lungs burning. I reached the top, slammed the hidden door shut, and shoved my heavy oak dresser in front of it, the wood screaming against the floor. I sat on the floor, gasping for air, clutching my knees, waiting for the pounding to start, but it didn't. Instead, it was quiet. For hours, I sat there in the dark, watching the dresser, waiting for it to move. I watched the dust motes dancing in the light of my phone until the battery died. Then there was only the dark dot, and in the dark, I began to hear it. Not knocking, not sliding, but breathing. It was coming from the dresser. No, it was coming from inside the dresser. I reached out a hand, my fingers trembling, and touched the wood. It was warm. The dresser was pulsing, like a giant, wooden heart. Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. 1% battery remaining. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it, my eyes blurring. It was a photo. A photo taken from the perspective of the dresser I was currently leaning against. Looking down at the top of my head, I looked up, slowly, my neck popping in the silence. There, in the ceiling, was a small circular vent I had never noticed before, tucked into the corner of the molding. A single wet human eye was staring down at me through the metal slats. It didn't blink. It just watched. I shouldn't have opened the door. Not because of what came inside, but because I finally realized that the door was never meant to keep things out. It was meant to keep me in. I'm still here, in the house. I can't leave. Every time I walk toward the front door, I hear that wet, rhythmic sliding sound coming from the other side of the wood. He's waiting for me to open it again. And the stitches, the little red marks on my own lips, they're starting to feel very, very tight. I can feel the thread moving under my skin now. It's a slow, steady pull, drawing my lips together. I try to scream, but only a faint whistle escapes. I realize now that the mannequin in the basement wasn't a warning. It was a preview. I am becoming the next one to sit in that chair. I am the next one who will point the way for the next poor soul who opens the door. I can hear him now, moving through the walls. He's not knocking anymore. He's scratching. A long, slow drag of those black pointed fingers against the wallpaper. He's right behind the roses. He's waiting for the dresser to stop pulsing. He's waiting for the light to go out for good. If you ever hear a knock and see nothing through the glass, don't turn around, because he's already in the room with you, and he's just waiting for you to notice that you're not alone anymore. Would you like me to continue with the next story in this compilation, or should we explore what happens when the narrator finally decides to move the